Father, as we look at your word this morning, I ask that you would help us to accept it for the challenge that it is, accept it for the encouragement that it is, and help us just to learn to keep our eyes on you when you take away everything else that we've been looking at. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. As Gary said, we talked about Joseph waiting, and this week we're going to talk about Joshua and his waiting. And as we've always tried to do, we're going to try to see it through their point of view, because we all have this disease, and this disease makes us read the Bible from our point of view. And so we're going to try to see it the way he saw it with the circumstances that he was in. And at the end, we're going to do a little comparison between his waiting and Joseph's waiting. I know you're all very familiar with Joshua's story, and so we're not going to do a lot of verse by verse talking, but I am going to refer to passages because it helps establish the chronology of his life. And so with that said, if you want to just follow along, we're going to be in Exodus 17 to begin with, because that's about the earliest mention of Joshua that I could find. So what's the setting for Exodus 17? Well, my Bible, the NLT, has a little statement at the top of the chapter. It says, water from the rock. So, what's going on? Moses has led the Israelites through the Red Sea. They've escaped from Egypt. They've had manna fall from the sky. And now they're thirsty, and so that brings them to this passage here in Exodus 17. And starting in verse 8, I'm going to read that. It says, while the people of Israel were still at Rephidim, the warriors of Amalek attacked them. Moses commanded Joshua, choose some men, go out and fight the army of Amalek for us tomorrow. I will stand at the top of the hill holding the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did what Moses commanded and fought the army of Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur climbed to the top of a nearby hill. As long as Moses held up the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage, but whenever he dropped his hand, the Amalekites gained the advantage. So Moses' arms soon became so tired he could no longer hold them. So Aaron and Hur found a stone for him to sit on. Then they stood on each side of Moses, holding up his hands, so his hands held steady until the sun set. As a result, Joshua overwhelmed the army of Amalek in battle. This is the first mention of Joshua. And just before we move on to the next thing, I just want you to see one thing. The first thing mentioned we have of him, what's he doing? He's fighting a battle. In fact, Moses put him, I would say, at the position of the general or the commander-in-chief, right? He said, Joshua, you go pick the people you want to pick and do this job. And here's what Joshua didn't say. Hey, that's pretty risky business. He didn't also say this. Moses, why aren't you out fighting? What's my point? He humbly accepted the assignment he was given without hesitation. But the second thing is to be seen as this. While he accepted the assignment, he did not make the assignment successful, did he? Scripture makes it clear that it was all dependent upon Moses' arms. What's my point there? This man realizes he's carrying out his assignment, but he's doing it in the association with a leader. What's he not doing? He's not choosing his own assignment, and he's not doing it all by himself. So, he has a great start. And as we move on to this, flip over to Exodus 24 if you want to follow along. What's happening there? Moses is up on the mountain and he's receiving the 10 Commandments. Where is Joshua at this time? Exodus 24, 12, and 13. Exodus 24:12 and 13, the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain, stay there, and I will give you tablets of stone, which I have inscribed the instructions and commands so you can teach the people." So Moses and his assistant Joshua set out, and Moses climbed up the mountain of God. What do we see here? Once again, we see Joshua just being an assistant, and he's just there, and he's not really doing anything, but he is where he's supposed to be. What happens next? Well, we have the episode of the golden calf, Exodus 32. Exodus 32, starting in verse 15. Moses has been up on the mountain getting the 10 commandments. In verse 15, then Moses turned and went down the mountain. He held in his hands the 2 stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. These tablets were God's work. The words on them were written by God himself. When Joshua heard the boisterous noise of the people shouting below them, he exclaimed to Moses, "It sounds like war in the camp." But Moses replied, "No, it's not a shout of victory, not wailing of defeat. I hear the sound of celebration." And I want to stop right there. The next thing that happens is Moses has a temper fit and breaks the tablets. But once again, we see Joshua, but he's always in Moses' shadow. Moses is always in the forefront. Joshua is just what you would call a supporting actor in the movie, right? But you see him, once again, he's where he needs to be when he needs to be there. So, all of that's happening. Turn to Numbers 14, and this is really where the story gets interesting.
Can we?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Just a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Flip over to Exodus 33.
Uh-huh.
I love this part of Joshua. Verse 11. Inside the tent of meeting, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Afterward, Moses would return to the camp, but the young man who assisted him, Joshua, son of Nun, would remain behind in the tent of meeting. He took his turn to spend time with God.
Excellent point. Excellent point. He is just not a good, what I would call a good foot soldier. In military terms, there's a phrase they use called aide de camp. And it's basically you have a general, but you have his right-hand man who's always there by him. And that's what Joshua's doing. But this gives you, what she said, a clue to the man's, what I call his inner life. His inner life is communing with God. And here's the interesting thing from what she said is this. If you didn't catch it, Moses had his time, he left. But that was not enough time for Joshua. Joshua wanted more. Joshua wanted more. Do you remember when we looked at Elisha? What did Elisha ask Elijah that he wanted? What did Elisha want?
A double portion.
A double portion of your spirit. Remember that?
Yes.
This is the same idea that she's brought out, that Joshua wanted even more of what Moses had. So, now let's turn to the account of the spies. Numbers 14. So, they've been in the wilderness for a little while. They've come up to the Jordan River, and Moses sends out the 12 spies. Who can tell me what happens next? You remember the spies all bring back their report of the land? And you remember that 10 spies saw all the obstacles and said, "We can't do it." Joshua and Caleb saw the same obstacles and said, "We can do it."
With the Lord's help.
With the Lord's
If we are
help.
on the Lord's side,
Yes.
He will go before
Yes.
us and take care of it.
Yes, they chose to trust the promise that God made.
But they want to go back to Egypt.
Yep. Yeah.
The mass people.
The masses wanted to turn back. But here is the key thing. What had God promised these people? He promised them the land. So Joshua and Caleb took their stand on the promise. The other 10 chose to disbelieve the promise. Okay? And if you look at Numbers 14, and if you look at verse 10, it says, the whole community began to talk about stoning Joshua and Caleb. Then the glorious presence of the Lord appeared to all the Israelites at the tabernacle. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people treat me with contempt? Will they never believe me, even after all the miraculous signs I've done among them? I will disown them and destroy them with a plague. Then I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they are. Well, at that point, Moses intercedes for the people. And so I would call it, you don't really think of God making a compromise. You know what I mean? But in a way, it's a compromise because God wanted to wipe them out right then. Moses interceded, okay? But what does God end up doing? He says, okay, I'm not going to kill them today, but they're going to wander in the desert for 40 years till this generation dies off. Okay? Here is the big point. What was going to happen with Joshua during this wandering? Where is he? How is he going to experience the wandering?
Same as everybody else.
Same as everybody else. He's going to have to take every step they take. He's going to have to eat the food they ate. He's going to have to go through what they went through. You see what I'm saying? So here's my big question for you today. How many of you have had to wait due to somebody else's fault? Probably all of us who have married have been down that road. We all have to wait some time, and it's somebody else's fault. Joshua and Caleb, and Joshua is what I want to talk about specifically, he had to wait through no fault of his own. From last week, what did we see about Joseph's period of waiting? Was it his fault? No. It wasn't Joseph's fault that he was sold as a slave. It wasn't Joseph's fault that Potiphar's wife accused him of rape. It wasn't his fault, if you remember the baker and the cupbearer, that the cupbearer failed to mention him to Pharaoh. Remember all of that? Here is the deal. You know what one of the hardest things about waiting is? It's not just when you don't get what you want. It's when you can blame it on somebody else. All of us are old enough to know it was my fault. I chose to drive in 5 o'clock traffic in New York City. I have no right to complain. Right? I chose that. What makes it really hard is when I'm having to wait and it's not my fault. Joshua has to wait before he can cross the Jordan River. How long did he have to wait? 40 years. How would you like to have your legacy, your tombstone say this? Jimmy Fuson spent most of his life just waiting. Isn't that a great legacy? I'm sure somebody would want to write my memoirs just based on that alone. But this is what this man is confronted with. But let's talk a little deeper. Where was he while he was waiting? Was he in the comfort of his living room? Was he passing the days watching Netflix movies? No. Where was he? In a godforsaken desert. Not only that, I'm sure you're familiar enough with this passage that you know all the trials and struggles they went through there, right? Joshua had to go through all of that too. Every morning, Joshua could look around and he had to bite his tongue when he could look at people that he was actually related to by ancestry, right? They all came from Abraham, right? How would you like to spend 40 years biting your tongue and not telling your cousin how stupid they were?
My tongue would be in half. That's a fact.
That's a fact. Joshua is faced with these kind of problems. And you know what I find interesting? When you look at the saga in their 40 years, they did a lot of complaining. But you never hear a word about Joshua complaining. You even hear a word about Moses griping. If you remember what happened during these 40 years, you remember Moses, you remember the water, you remember the rock, where God said, speak to it, and Moses got so angry he took his rock and hit it. Remember that? That's happening right in front of Joshua. And so here's what Joshua is seeing. These people failed and I'm stuck. And now my leader has screwed up. Because you remember what God said in response to Moses striking the rock? Not only now are these people who failed to believe not going to cross, the leader himself is not going to cross. That's what Joshua is seeing. He is seeing everybody collapse around him. While he is having to wait and endure things he should not have to endure, because he did the right thing at the right time, he's having to wait and watch from the greatest, who is Moses, to the nobody at the bottom, fail around him. But he himself does not waver and he does not fail. He is a champion waiter. If they give trophies for waiting, he should get the Super Bowl trophy. That's the caliber of this man. Uncomplaining, patient, courage and character when all around him are failing.
Do you think he thought of himself as a victim?
Here's the problem. He truly was a victim, right?
Yes.
He's a victim because he's innocent and others are guilty. But he does not choose to handle it like a victim, demanding justice from others. Joseph did not demand justice from his brothers, did he? Joshua is not demanding justice here. He's not stomping his foot at God and saying, look, I did better than these people. There's one of the most well-known sayings that's in the Bible, and you hear it on the street from atheists. You reap what you sow. No? These people are reaping what they've sown. Is Joshua reaping what he has sown? No. He sowed well, but he's not reaped well. They sowed poorly, they're reaping poorly. And now, how about Moses? Is he going to reap what he sowed? But not Joshua. He's just still waiting. He sowed right, but he's not reaping well. Sometimes when you wait, you have to wait while in the lives of those around you, they are reaping what they're sowed. I will say it again. Sometimes when God makes us wait, part of that waiting is watching while others reap what they sow. You remember what I said at the outside about waiting? It's never just about you. Here it is again. Joshua's waiting is not just about Joshua. We have Moses' life and we have these other people's lives, all we woven into the story. One of my favorite verses in Proverbs is 9:12. He who is wise for himself. He who scoffs, he alone will bear it. That verse is simply saying the same thing as that you reap what you sow. Only it's doing it in the context of wisdom. He who is wise for himself. Whether my wisdom benefits her or not is beside the point. God's saying, hey, Jimmy, you're going to reap what you sow. He who scoffs, he alone will bear it. God is saying this, Jimmy, if you scoff, I'm able to design circumstances that you will pay for it, but she won't. That's what Proverbs 9:12 means. It's a very individual thing with an individual payback. But from Joshua's point of view, he's still waiting to see how his wisdom is going to pay off for himself.
I just gotta admire that guy.
Yeah.
You know, you're sitting there and you're going through difficult times and you look over at the person next to you and you're like, come on. You know, and you look at it constantly. To me, I would just look. And I would be like, what can we do to kill this generation off earlier? To get this over with. Let's go to battle somewhere.
Yeah, right.
The thing about him was he was patient, not trying to grab the power in his own hands and say, get out of the way, I can do this.
Excellent point.
He was
Excellent point.
satisfied to stay in the background and let it do what it was going to do.
Theodore Roosevelt so wisely said, 9/10 of being wise is being wise in time. Joseph had to wait for the right time, right? Joshua is having to wait for the right time. Joshua could have said, remember the Amalekites? I was there. I was leading the charge. No, he doesn't do that, does he? He doesn't do that. The man has this rare skill. He knows when to button his lips.
When you sign up for that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I need to staple gun.
That tells me Joshua wasn't after power. Because
That, you're taking me to the end too quick.
when you look at all our generals that have been in the military, they're all after power.
Yes,
They're
they're
trying
all
to
after
put their
power.
name up there.
They're all after power. And if you want to see two generals fight, they'll fight each other over who gets the credit. I do some reading with military history. You've heard of Douglas MacArthur? That man had an ego as big as Donald Trump's.
Pretty big.
Pretty big. But Joshua, what do you see? When he's called to fight the battle, he steps up and he fights it. When the battle's over, he retires. And now, even at great cost to himself, he's just having to wander around every day for 40 years. And you know what he's thinking? Hey, God, I ain't getting no younger. He is stuck. And here is the thing. God told him it was going to be 40 years, didn't he? What is worse? Waiting when you know when the end of it's going to happen, or waiting when you don't know when the end is going to happen? If it's 40 years, I would just as soon not know. Because I don't want to be sitting here counting down the days for 40 years. However, on the other hand, when I've had to wait, when's it going to be over? When's it going to be over? Are we get about there yet? Are we going to get there yet? Right? Joshua has to wait, to me, with the liability of knowing that it's going to be this long.
Yeah, but that tells you there's at least an end to it. The
There-
other one, it doesn't. I want to know there is going to be an end. I may not be there, but there is an end.
Well, when I had 4 children
Yeah,
and I was changing diapers,
yeah.
my consolation was this: Jimmy, even God doesn't stop time. There's going to be an end to this. So, anyway, so Joshua's stuck. Turn to Numbers 27:12. Let's go to the next little picture. Numbers 27:12. So they got the 40-year judgment sentence. In the meantime, Moses has struck the rock. We're not going to read that. I just talked about it. So, Numbers 27:12. One day the Lord said to Moses, "Climb one of the mountains east of the river. Look out over the land I've given the people of Israel. After you've seen it, you will die like your brother Aaron, for you both rebelled against my instructions in the wilderness of Zin. When the people of Israel rebelled, you failed to demonstrate my holiness to them at the waters. These are the waters of Meribah at Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin." Then Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, you are the God who gives breath to all creatures. Please appoint a new man as leader for the community. Give them someone who will guide them wherever they go and lead them into battle, so the community of the Lord will not be like sheep without a shepherd." The Lord replied, "Take Joshua, son of Nun, who has the Spirit in him, and lay your hands on him. Present him to Eleazar the priest before the whole community, and publicly commission him to lead the people." And I'll just stop right there, because here's the deal that the question this passage presents is this. Obviously, first of all, Joshua does not seem to be physically present when God's communicating this. We saw that Joshua was present with Moses on the mountain at the giving of the Ten Commandments. Joshua was present in the tent of meeting. But we don't know that Joshua knows this right now. But the question is this: exactly how close was this to Moses' death did this conversation happen? It's obvious that it's close to the end. And of course, we see that, Moses knows that he's not going to cross the Jordan River. Okay. But here is the deal. We see here, if you want to look at it from Joshua's point of view, that God is beginning to solve the problem, but Joshua has nothing to do with the solution. Or let me put it to you a different way. When God pronounced judgment and said the people are going to wander for 40 years, Joshua knew that, didn't he? However, what was not revealed to Joshua at that time was that he was going to be the leader that takes them across. Why do I emphasize that? If God would have told Joshua, "Hang in there, buddy, I've got great plans for you, it's just going to take 40 years, would that have softened the blow just a little bit? A tiny bit.
Maybe.
In other words, here's what it would give him. It would give him hope. It would give him hope in his waiting. Or to put it a different way, it would give a greater purpose to his waiting.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Here's why that's important. One of the biggest things that can anchor us to trust God when we're waiting, if we are convinced He has a good purpose for it. The hardest thing about waiting is not that the waiting itself is hard, although that is. It's when you see no good reason to wait. Joshua, at the outset of his waiting, was not given a good reason. The only reason he was given to wait was because of other people's misbehavior. But now what we see here is that in the sovereignty of God, God is starting to orchestrate a reason for the waiting and a future in Joshua with it. But did Joshua wake up one day and go to Moses and say, "Hey, bud, you hit the rock, you screwed up, these people screwed up, I haven't screwed up. I think I should be the next leader. What do you think?" Or to put it this way, kind of the way Jan did, this man does not get consumed with his role. He is not consumed with his destiny.
He may not even see himself as the leader.
That's my point.
Because
I don't know.
I have a son who, in the army, he never grew up, he was shy, kind of, really never took a leadership role, blah, blah, blah. He got in the army, and they saw, we got a call from the army, oh no, what's he done? And they wanted him to go from whatever it is, I forget what they call it, something in blue. Anyway, to be a leader, he didn't want to be an officer.
Mhm.
And so that was not, he didn't see that in himself. Now, the Army did, through a variety of services, he ended up being a drill sergeant. And I
Okay.
said, you don't have to worry, you had a mother who was a drill sergeant. I said, you're going to be familiar with your role.
Yes, yes.
But no, he didn't see himself as that.
Right.
So I'm just saying, I don't know
No,
if
no,
that's true.
I don't, there's no evidence that Joshua thought he was special.
Right.
I think Joshua just woke up every day
Yeah.
and said, you know, whatever God puts in front of me, whether it's waiting or fighting the Amalekites, I'll wait or I'll fight the Amalekites.
Well, you can't know because you can't put too many words between the lines, but this seems to be a good example of just trusting the Lord, period.
Yep.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Don't try to make him tell you what's gonna happen or make you feel good. You should make your own self feel good. It should be, you know, and we all know that, but it's kind of hard to put it in practice.
It is. It's very hard to put it in practice.
You know, I think that we are all waiting.
Yeah.
We're in, as they say, we're in God's waiting room here in the Lord. And but we're all waiting to see our Heavenly Father.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's kind of there's a reason that God does things. You know, He didn't just say, you know, I'm coming on such and such a date.
Yeah.
There's no end to it, like we've been talking about.
Yeah. There's no end to
And
it.
so, you know, it's that waiting, and my dad was good at it. He always, Raptors next year, you know, which he was always saying, I'm like, Dad, you've been saying that for 30 years. But we're all waiting, but I was gonna say one other thing. We went to Israel years ago, and there was lots of places that I thought were really touched me, you know, where Jesus walked and all that. But one of the things that really touched me was standing on Mount Nebo. And there's not that big of a, you know, at the mount there. And I was glad they took us to that site where Moses stood and looked out into the promised land and knew he could never have it. And we stood, you know, I said, gosh, there's gotta be somewhere. He stood right here. And I couldn't find it. What was Joshua doing at that time? Was he standing next to him, or, you know, does it say?
He's not mentioned there.
Yeah, I didn't
It's
think
not
so.
mentioned.
It was Moses and God's time.
Just
Just
them alone.
their time together, you know, God saying, this is what I promised you.
Yeah.
And, you know, son, I wish you would have obeyed me.
And
Then you could walk in. But I am allowing you to see it all.
And I think that speaks so much for God's forgiveness again, and His grace and His mercy, that He got to go up there and just let Him see it. And said all those years and all that hardship you went through, this is what it's for. And I just, God's grace and mercy is always just overwhelms you sometimes.
Yes.
So, Joshua is not a spring chicken anymore, is he? Why did I bring that out? You know what would really discourage you? If you had to wait a long time only to know that what God was going to ask you to do would be one of the hardest things you had to do. In other words, here's what did not happen. Joshua, you are now in charge. Here's the Oval Office. You have these waiters to serve you food every day. You have the Secret Service to guard you. No, Joshua, strap on your sword. You're going to have to go fight and spear people and whack them with swords just like all these other people do to get the land of Canaan. Is that not what happened? He had to fight the Battle of Jericho, all the other battles, right? It's all of that. But I want to emphasize this. Just because Moses was appointed as leader, just because Moses appointed Joshua as a leader, and Joshua, it was made clear that Joshua was going to lead them over there, okay? At that point, did the next rest of Joshua's life become clear? You're going to do this on this day, you're going to do this on this day, Here's what I'm trying to say. Even as his waiting was a day at a time, so would his ministry be. Even as his waiting was a day at a time, so would his ministry be. We tend to think there's this big difference between what we do for God and waiting. Waiting is pointless. We shouldn't have to do it. Others make us do it. We don't understand why we have to do it. We see it that way. But when you hear a message on ministry, oh, it'll be fulfilling, God's going to use you, blah, 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 you'll be great. You don't see any of that with Joshua. What you see, you know what you see God doing? Every step, God just opened enough light that this man could take another step of faith. God just gave him enough information at the time that he had to have that information for him to do what he had to do. If you think back to the Battle of the Amalekites, that happened on a specific day. Joshua was told, go fight them, right? He was not told, hey man, this is the first of many battles you're going to fight. This is going to be your minute. You're going to be a battlefield general. In other words, he didn't get the whole picture opened up, did he? In fact, what he got was this big interruption called 40 years. Here is what we need to see about waiting. Ultimately, it all comes down to, do you accept God's timetable? I want to be the master of my time, don't you? I want to be the master of my time. Waiting is I surrender my time to Him. We all know that we come here and give money to the Lord, right? We all know that we come here and we may do things for the Lord, right? But the problem is when God wants, He does not want my money. In fact, I find it easier to give money than time. I don't know about you. Because at least with money, I give it and then I'm gone. Right? I'm not stuck. It's hard to give my time to the Lord, especially when it looks to be so pointless, especially when it looks like my surrender of my time is somebody else's fault. It's hard for me to surrender my time when I don't think I'm going anywhere, that it's not leading anywhere. That's what Joshua was faced with. Here's a contrast. What? Did you say something? Okay. Here is a contrast I want you to see between Joseph and Joshua. Joseph had to wait for God to use him to provide for other people. The brothers were starving, right? They needed food. Joseph had to wait to be put in charge of the food to provide for his brothers, right? How about Joshua? Joshua had to wait for God to fulfill His promises to others through him. Remember now, God has given the Abrahamic covenant to the Hebrews, no? But the fulfillment of that promise happened through Joshua's leadership, right? He was the battlefield general that went across, right? So, while Joseph was used for God to provide for people, Joshua was used for God to fulfill His promises through Joseph to others. And to me, that puts a whole different spin on it. If you can see sometimes, perhaps you've seen it in your ministry, where God used you to fulfill some kind of promise He made to somebody else. That was Joshua's role. He was instrumental in God finally fulfilling the Abrahamic covenant of the land to the Hebrews. But Joshua knew none of that when he was waiting. So once again, I'll just reiterate it. The key to successful waiting is realizing it has a purpose. The key to successful waiting is realizing it has a purpose, but that purpose is bigger than you.
I wonder, while Joshua was waiting, if he knew he was going to be willing to lead the Hebrews into the promised land.
Well, Moses did not appoint him till very late in the game.
Yeah.
So that's the answer to your question. I can't put a number to it, but he could, out of 40 years, he could have spent 35 years not knowing that. I don't know. I just know it was late in the game. That he had to wait, but he never knew what his role was going to be.
It's almost like the baton, handing off the baton.
Right.
When Moses was going to die
Mm-hmm.
is when
Mm-hmm.
Joshua was
Yeah.
given that.
Yeah. In that passage we read, when God told Moses basically appointing, but he said do it through the priest. When you read that passage, here's what we see there. That was when it was made public to everybody. That was when he got his official ceremony in public that he was going to be the leader. Or to put it in a different way, kind of like what Jen was saying, Joshua had the humility to wait for God's official ceremony to put him in the captaincy. He didn't grasp for it. He did not pray for it. He simply waited for it. If you see one thing about Joshua and Joseph, it's this. Both men waited for God to design a solution to their individual problems that they never would have thought on their own. That's a long sentence, but let me say it again. Both men had to wait for God to design a solution to their problems that they would have never thought of on their own. Joseph did not sit in a prison cell and say, here's the answer to my problem. I'll get Pharaoh to appoint me a leader, then I'll be out of this and I can do whatever I want. Joshua did not wake up on year 30 of his waiting and say, God, here's the answer to my problem. You need to take Moses off the scene, get rid of him, pull him off the stage, put me in charge. In other words, humanly speaking, that would have been the solution to their problem, wouldn't it? They never conceived of God's solution to their problem being what it was. When we are waiting in God's time, we need to realize this. He is designing an answer that you never would have thought of. Our prayers, when we're waiting, are filled with answers to our problems. We just need God to act on it, right? God, here's the answer to my waiting. You just need to do this, this, this. Have you never prayed like that? These men waited for God to design a solution that they never would have conceived of on their own.
It all comes down to a plan, and God has the.
It all comes down to a plan.
You can't put a roof on a house without walls and a foundation.
No, no,
So,
no. That's the problem with waiting, is that we have to decide, is the solution to my waiting really a better answer than I'm thinking of? Is the solution to my waiting a better answer than I'm thinking of today? Joseph,
That's the thing. God's answers are always better than our answers. But we think that our answers is a really good idea.
It's a really good
It
idea.
should happen that way because that really would fix everything and it doesn't.
no,
It's always the way God does it that you wouldn't even think of,
you wouldn't even think of.
and that's always better. When you can look at it in hindsight, wow, I'm glad he didn't do it the way I wanted him to do it.
Right, right. God's answer to our waiting is not just about solving our problems, but other people's. But when I'm waiting, my focus is on me. But God's answer to Joseph's waiting and Joshua's waiting is not just about their individual issues, it was about everybody else too. God's answers in my waiting force me to confront the fact that God knows more than me and He can do things I could never do. Any other comments, questions,
I was just gonna
complaints?
say, I think it's interesting that they came back, Caleb and Joshua, and they wanted to stone them too. And they, so for 4 years, these people are wandering around. They know that Joshua and Caleb are the only ones that are gonna make it in there. They're all gonna die.
Right.
So there gotta be some real hostility there. I mean, even though they're gonna play the victim role to
Right,
the
right.
max. But in the meantime, they're gonna hate this guy,
Right.
even though he did what was right. But, so it wasn't easy in that regard either. He wasn't the favorite guy in the village.
No, you're right.
But by the time he became the leader, that generation had passed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, Moses is told that you're gonna die. And Moses says, well, let's pick another leader. Then he didn't wanna leave these people leaderless.
No, he didn't.
And that happens in Numbers 27, but it doesn't actually happen until Deuteronomy 34.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And a lot of that isn't in order of events. We always think that, since Genesis started here and this happened here and then it's all, in line, and it's not.
No, right.
And so, we don't know how long that took, because there's all these laws and everything that Moses gets for the people after he finds that out, according to how it's written in here.
Right, right. No, you're right. We don't have a firm grasp of the exact timetable.
Right.
Yeah,
And then all the blessings and cursings
yeah,
happen, Moses says, you gotta remember, you gotta remember, you gotta remember, because he was so afraid that they would forget everything that happened after he dies, because he knows he's gonna die.
yeah.
And he's not gonna make it into the promised land either, so he's trying to tell them all of that. But Joshua doesn't actually take the mantle, and I love the way it says it in Deuteronomy 34:9. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the